Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Our webinar will begin shortly. Hi again, and thanks for joining us for today's discussion on getting better prepared for online and hybrid learning. I'm Kevin Kelly, an educational advisor at ACU, and today we're here to help you prepare for online and hybrid learning in your classrooms. I'd like to take care of some logistics first. If you'd like to take advantage of the automated Zoom captions, click the live transcript button and choose Show Subtitle from the menu that appears. If you don't see the live transcript button, then click the More button with 3 dots to find the Show Subtitle option. Also, please be sure to note that the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen is how we'll be collecting your questions. So please use this function to submit as many as you like. If you notice a question from someone else that was also on your mind, please like that question or upvote it to move it up the queue. I'd also like to bring to your attention the resources that accompany this webinar, including the Back to School Toolkit that can be found on the ACU website. You'll see there's a link in the chat. Now, it's my honor to introduce Harry Williams from the Thurgood Marshall College Fund to help frame the conversation. Harry?
Thank you, Kevin. And let me also add my welcome to all of you for being a part of this very, very important initiative here today. There's nothing more important than getting our students ready for this very difficult time in their lives as it relates to what's happening with the pandemic and making the adjustment. I represent the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. We represent the 47 public historically Black colleges and universities, over 300,000 students. And I can tell you firsthand, this new norm that we're experiencing is having an impact on our schools and our students as in making the adjustment. And so today is very, very important to the faculty and to the administrators that's part of this webinar, and you're going to learn a lot. We are very fortunate to be partnering with the best in class ACU. You don't get any better than ACU as it relates to preparing you for these amazing opportunities to support your students and support them transitioning eventually towards graduation. So we're delighted to be a partner with them. We're delighted that you're on this call today and look forward to the questions that you were asked in the engagement, because we have an all-star panel that's going to be engaging you, and I know that they're going to do an amazing job. Back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Harry. Like you, I'm excited for today's conversation on getting better prepared for online and hybrid learning. And now I'd like to welcome that all-star panel that you just described. First, we have Flower Darby, a faculty member in the field of educational leadership at Northern Arizona University. She's also a keynote speaker, author, and scholar on equitable and inclusive teaching. Next, we have Dr. Michael Pullin, Associate Dean of Academics at Queensborough Community College from the City University of New York. And we have Dr. Wanda White, the director of the Center for Innovative and Transformative Instruction at Winston-Salem State University. During the conversation today, again, we welcome your questions and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the conversation. So let's start with understanding you and our panelists better. The pandemic has forced institutions and instructors to shift the way they teach. For most of 2020, many institutions were online, and going into the fall, many are still online or opted for some form of hybrid or high flex instruction. I want to start with a question that we would like everyone to answer in the chat. What modality are you currently teaching? And I will ask our panelists to address this question as well. Panelists, what modality are you currently teaching or your institution is currently implementing for the fall semester? And let's start with you, Wanda.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be here representing Winston-Salem State. WSSU, we're using all three modalities currently. Our students are back on campus, socially and physically distanced, but a lot of our classes are heavily hybrid, meaning that faculty are flipping the instruction where a lot of it is online, where the students access it and they're coming to class on limited basis. So it's almost like a flipped version, but heavily hybrid at WSSU, several online, and a few traditional face-to-face classes.
Thank you. And Flower, what's going on at Northern Arizona University?
We are embracing the vibrancy of in-person learning here at NAU. We always offer a robust selection of fully online programs, and so those are still available, but we are encouraging our students to return to the on-campus experience that they love. Faculty are also maintaining flexible attendance options for students who are not able to come into class. So some students can join remotely and such, but the focus is on in-person.
And Michael.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. I think, Queensborough and the other 25 campuses of CUNY are all partially online and partially in person. The goal we set for the fall was 60% in person or hybrid and 40% fully online. In the spring, we're going to be moving to a 70-30 split. So that will definitely be a new normal for us. I think most of our schools, with the exception of the School for Professional Studies, was mostly in person prior to the pandemic.
Thank you. So in light of how we are moving forward, and we can see that the results of the poll show a fairly split group with 44% in the hybrid space, 27 in person, and 29% online. And so we can see that everyone is still figuring it out. And with the poll that only has a single choice, we know that some institutions, that might be the primary option, but they may be doing a mixture as well, as you all have noted. So how have you prepared yourself, or how are you helping faculty prepare for this semester? And I know some campuses have already begun the fall. What has been successful for you in the past year, and what challenges are you facing or anticipate facing this semester with online and hybrid learning? And Wanda, let's start with you again.
So everybody knows 2020 was a game changer for higher ed, and WSSU was probably unique in that we were used to a traditional space. We didn't have a lot of online programs. So shifting to online was a huge quantum leap for us. And it was a monumental leap, but it was wonderful because our faculty were resilient. We were able to have faculty coaches help us train other faculty in a train-to-trainer version of online course development. We had continued online support services for designing classes using instructional designers. And we did a lot with emphasizing that, even though it's a change of modality, some of the things that you do in a traditional class with learning modules and making sure students understand learning sequences, purpose and intention, outcomes, to make sure things stayed the same more than a lot of things changing, so that it would give some kind of normal feel for our faculty and students.
That's so important. And Flower, can you describe the preparations that you engaged in or helped faculty perform?
Yes, absolutely, Kevin. So I've really redoubled my efforts and my focus on making and sustaining connections with and between students. So for example, the classes that I primarily teach are asynchronous online by design, but I have implemented Flipgrid discussions and the students are loving that. They say they feel connected to each other in ways that they've never experienced. I've also implemented optional meet and greet synchronous online meetings, not required because the class is asynchronous, but students love the opportunity to come in and connect again with each other and with me. And then another focus area for me during this season that we're in has been to do even more to foster equitable learning outcomes. So designing for relevance, designing for choice, being very transparent in communicating instructions, expectations, being available to our students. These are some of the things that I have been redoubling my efforts in recently.
Thanks, Flower. And Michael, can you share what's going on at Queensborough in terms of preparation?
Well, when the pandemic started, we ramped up our, just our basic Blackboard training course through our Office of Educational Technology and trained, hundreds of faculty very, very quickly. But to follow up on that, we've had a number of pedagogy courses offered, including AQ, which we started up in fall 2020 and have been running since. And also the School for Professional Studies at CUNY put together an online pedagogy course, and we've had a lot of faculty take that as well. So that's really been the scale up. And departments have all been responding to this challenge, in ways they think are best for the students. So we've had to take laboratory courses online, recording videos of experiments and so on and so on. So it's been a real challenge. We have some accredited programs that require in-person instruction, such as nursing and massage therapy, and we've had to accommodate in-person classes and in the gymnasium socially distanced to deal with that. So it's been a real challenge, but surprisingly, it's gone very smoothly, and so we're real proud of how we've been able to respond to the crisis.
So in AQ's webinar called Meeting Students Where They Are, our panelists talked about meeting students where they are and practices to better aid in transparency and communication. And in your opening remarks for the last question, all of you touched on working with and for students. So if we were to dive a little deeper into that, how have you helped your students and your faculty adapt to a hybrid or online environment since it's still fairly new for everyone? Are there any specific practices that you have implemented to support this transition? And Flower, let's start with you this time.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I think what you just said is really the crux of my approach, and that is to be very transparent, very explicit about the newness of these environments. Some people have been teaching online asynchronous for a long time, but many, many people are including our students, are in these virtual, remote, hybrid online spaces. And I think it's very important to recognize that, to call that out, to acknowledge that we might be a little uncomfortable, or this might feel weird, or we might feel isolated or disconnected. So that kind of messaging for both faculty and for students, I think, is really helpful, reminding us that this is new, that we need to give ourselves grace, that we know how to do this in person, but there was a time maybe when we felt less confident about teaching in person. So give ourselves that little bit of time to get more comfortable in these spaces as well.
Thanks, Flower. Michael, how are you and your colleagues at Queensborough meeting students where they are?
Well, we very swiftly moved all of our student services online, from advising to financial aid, admissions, etc. In addition, the CUNY bought about hundreds of thousands of devices, tablets, laptops, etc. And we mailed them to students or had them come by campus to pick them up. So there's, a big technological divide. Many of our students come from lower income families or self-sufficient. And so we really had to help them bridge that technological gap. In some cases, we were sending out wireless hotspots so that the wireless access wouldn't be a barrier. So that's been a real challenge. And then all the technical support that goes with sending all those devices out has been a real big lift for our IT department and student support services. So that that took us about a semester, really, I think, to get right. I think by the time fall 2020 arrived, we were doing pretty well. Most students had what they needed in advance of the semester, and things were operating fairly smoothly at that point. So that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges we faced was the technology aspect of this.
Thanks, Michael. And Wanda, can you share what you all are doing at Winston-Salem State?
Absolutely. Not to repeat what Flower and Michael said, but some of what both said apply to WSSU, specifically taking student services online. Much of our student support services now have an online presence. And I wanted to touch more on what Michael said, because it's very important at Winston-Salem State, making sure we address equity issues such as access with the digital divide. We know that many of our students, like he mentioned his student population, when the pandemic hit, they had digital access issues, whether it was internet access or even having the appropriate tools on hand away from campus. So immediately addressing those needs for our students, sending out equipment or hotspots to those students. But then when we started matriculating back, or even getting more acclimated to being online, if ever that happens, looking at ways to balance asynchronous instruction, because a lot of times when we meet synchronously with our students on Zoom, and I know our faculty quickly adapted to Zoom and would hold their classes religiously at the times that they had. A lot of times that didn't work for many students if they were sharing devices with siblings or if they had to access issues. So we spent a lot of time last summer and up through this upcoming fall, talking with our faculty and providing ways to make their instruction more asynchronous, accessible at all times, where the students, if they happen to miss the synchronous session for whatever reason, they're able to get that. So just really being intentional about looking at how our students operate and what they need, and addressing that and meeting them where they are, to use Flower's words.
And I know a couple of you spoke specifically about hotspots, and we have a question in the Q&A if any campuses are providing training on how to use those hotspots. Does anybody want to field that question?
Yeah, we had a website with basic instructions, and then the help desk that they could call if they were having a hard time.
Same here. The help desk was available to students and faculty.
Great. And I know before we jump into our next formal question, we're seeing some activity around tips for teaching synchronous, in-person, and online sessions that support active learning where students feel included, motivated, and engaged. So do any of you have any strategies that you want to share with our audience?
I saw that question come in, and what I wasn't sure if we meant sort of that dual streaming model where we have people in the room and people joining synchronous online as well. But I'll address that scenario because I do believe it's a very, very challenging context to keep people in both environments engaged, both in the room and online. One of the things, and this tip actually works if you are teaching fully online synchronous as well. One of my favorite strategies is to provide students with a guided notes document or partial PowerPoint slides or diagrams that they can annotate during the class. What this does is it provides both engagement and accountability, so that if you're concerned about whether your students have their cameras on or off, what are they doing if their cameras are off? Well, if you provide them with an activity to be completing throughout the class meeting, then again, that builds in some accountability as well. And that also taps into learning science, providing that partial structure helps people learn and process and retain new information more effectively. So that can be a really equitable and inclusive strategy to use as well.
Thanks, Flower.
Um,
So you touched on the fact that we are in this space where we're seeing multiple modalities at the same time. And in the midst of embracing what some might be calling the new normal, the transition to making institutions online ready and student ready is still far away. So is hybrid and online learning here to stay, do you think? What does the future look like to you? And how can we continue to reassure students and faculty that this new normal is still the same learning? And we're seeing some questions about it in the Q&A. So Michael, what would you say about this new normal that's emerging?
well, I think that at Queensborough, at least, many faculty and many of us were, reluctant to do too much online instruction, both due to the technological challenges, but also the concerns about academic honesty and legitimacy of the experience. Now that we've been forced to go 100% online, I think a lot of minds have been changed. A lot of faculty have learned that this can be a good way to teach if done well, and so they're much more interested in it. And our students have very busy lives. They often work full time or care for members of the family, etc. And so even being able to take 1 or 2 classes a semester in their schedule online is a huge benefit to them. So we're seeing a lot of demand for the online course section. So I don't think we're ever going back to having just a handful of courses fully online or hybrid. I think that the new normal is going to be probably across uni, where there's a significant number of significant part of the course schedule that's offered at least partially online. So I think that's where we're headed in the future.
Thanks, Michael. Wanda, do you want to share what your thoughts are about the new normal?
Yes, I agree with Michael. And having taught online for over 25 years, I always said that, at some point, it's not going to be a choice for institutions. And surprisingly, last year was that point. But I think we can take away more positive aspects from this experience, because if we think about it, many times we were using hybrid aspects of online teaching, whether it was through attendance or putting your syllabus out on the LMS. So faculty, getting them to realize that they were actually moving in that direction anyway, has been a positive experience. And then one thing that we like to emphasize at WSSU is we can share so many different ways to teach online, different tools that can make technology integration fun and innovative, but encouraging faculty to find that one tool or find that one practice that works and feel comfortable with that. Don't try to use everything. And, if you like Zoom, stick with Zoom. Don't try Teams and WebEx. So finding what you like, what works best for you, feeling comfortable with that, and it makes the online and hybrid space much more comfortable for the faculty member, and the students can sense it and they're more comfortable too.
Thanks, Wanda. Flower, do you want to round out the conversation about the new normal?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I would say absolutely it's here to stay. And here's the way I think about it, is that we all collectively agree, faculty, students, administrators alike, that this does provide flexibility. It does provide options and access. And the way I think about it is kind of what we've seen in telehealth and telemedicine over the last 18 months as well. We see an increasing number of online doctor appointments available. And while there are some medical appointments that you do want to go into the office and have the hands-on exam or the physical or the closer connection, there are lots of other appointments that we can handle using these virtual connections. And so I believe that telemed is here to stay and increasing availability, and the same thing with these online options. And for institutions who weren't really necessarily prepared for this future, I would invite us to reflect on what we can do better using technology tools, things that we can do more conveniently. In Zoom, for example, we can meet with a student, share a screen, and talk through their paper assignment and give really detailed and convenient feedback in a modality that works. In our learning management systems, there are a lot of functions and features that rely on learning science to help students spend more meaningful time on tasks. So just as Michael and Wanda said, this is an opportunity that we have ahead of us. Let's look at what we can do better using these environments, and let's also recognize, I saw a comment in the Q&A, let's recognize that this does take time and effort on the part of faculty to develop some new approaches, new practices, become comfortable with new tools. And so ideally, and I know it's hard to do this in reality, but I would love to encourage institutions as well to be thinking about that toll that takes on faculty time and energy. How can we make space for continued professional learning about how to do these things well? How can we recognize and reward really great and innovative teaching practices? Those are big questions, but I think we need to be asking them right now.
Well, Flower, that's a really nice pivot to the Q&A questions that we're seeing. And I think you've actually alluded to the two sides of the coin, right? We're seeing a lot of innovation in how instructors are adapting to this new flexible environment, but we're also seeing exhaustion where faculty members are constantly relearning different aspects of teaching and learning with technology and in person and addressing multiple audiences at once. So I'm wondering if the three of you can share some strategies, both on the innovation side and on the ways we can support faculty as they go through this work.
So I'll be glad to jump in first. Since faculty development is my area, we're finding that offering different, a menu of choices for faculty to choose from based on their needs. But basically, as I mentioned earlier, the tools, many times when we offer tools, technology tools for active learning or high impact practices, faculty say, well, are you going to have a session on how to use the tool? But encouraging them that it's not really about the technical side, but introducing it to students. And the students many times will take the lead on it. They will like the innovation, the option, if they have a choice to do their paper in some digital format rather than write the actual paper. A lot of times students gravitate to that. So just having options out there has worked wonders as an innovation. And then, of course, having faculty development with incentives such as stipends, if administration would actually support, sometimes and ours does this a lot, opportunities, because we do have a program going on with AQ right now where we have 60 of our faculty involved in working on online course development. So just providing those opportunities and knowing that everyone's time is very limited and short, but encouraging them, and if you can, like Flower said, along the way, one day, plan resources and time into the actual workload. That would be wonderful.
Michael or Flower, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that I certainly agree with what Wanda said about professional development and online instruction. Obviously, that's crucial, and we're also utilizing AQ for that. I think also, as we go from this sort of emergency online mode to thinking about what it looks like in the future, we're setting up a system where all online courses have been assessed using quality matters standards and so on, and making sure that every instructor has received significant training in pedagogy and the technical aspects of our learning management system. I think those things are crucial. Obviously, schools who do a lot of online have systems like that in place. And then, finally, I think, working with faculty on the cycle of assessment in their online courses, so they know that learning objectives are being met or not met and are able to adjust accordingly, just like they would do in their in-person classes. I think that's crucial. That keeps up the quality of the experience, the quality of the education, and the high standards we know all of our faculty expect from their students.
Those are really great points. And if you don't mind, Kevin, I will just add a little bit more because this is a topic near and dear to my heart. How are we going to sustain, given the exhaustion that many of us are feeling, and our students too are very burdened right now? So again, I think I said this earlier, I think it's so important to message about giving ourselves grace, giving each other grace. I think it makes a big difference when leadership in our schools and our top administrators send encouraging messages. I would say that our new president at NAU is doing a really great job of just encouraging repeatedly how important this work is. And I think those messages can go a long way. But I also recommend that we think about a phrase that a colleague of mine here came up with, and I really love it. It's course design as self-care. And it's about keeping things simple. As Wanda said earlier, we don't have to do all the new tools and approaches all at once. Let's keep things simple. Let's plan breaks from time to time. Let's recognize the strain that we are all in and do what we can within our capacity, but not feeling like we have to become online teaching wizards at the drop of a hat. Again, many of us have been teaching in person for a long time, but think back to that first day that you stepped into the college classroom. You may have, as an educator, you may have experienced some nerves, some anxiety. It may have taken you longer to prepare to teach that year. I feel like that's where we are right now. Let's be willing to keep things simple, to do our best, to give ourselves grace, to protect time for refreshment, relaxation, screen breaks, and just recognize that we are all under this strain, but online teaching and learning isn't going away. So what are the mechanisms that we can implement in order to create a more sustainable experience for all of us?
Thanks for wrapping that up, Flower. And I know that in my own trainings where I support faculty, I'm also encouraging them that it's okay to rely on support. Whether it be another human, a colleague, even the students in your class, keeping an eye on the chat if you're doing 2 channels at once and you can't pay attention to both. I call it a chat jockey. And I know Carmen, my colleague, has an article on LinkedIn about remote buddies. So setting up systems where we let people know that, hey, things are different. We're going to do things slightly differently, and we're going to support the process by making it a human experience and not just a learning experience. What we're seeing in the Q&A are questions related to a couple things that you all have touched on. Michael, when you were talking about the last topic, you mentioned assessment, and we've seen some questions coming in around academic integrity and possible issues now that we're seeing more reliance on online channels. And so I'm wondering if you or any of the panel want to address academic integrity concerns as they pertain to this new normal we're seeing.
Well, there are technical tools such as Turnitin and test proctoring that can help you, prevent or find academic dishonesty. But, I'd rather see faculty moving to forms of assessment that are just harder to cheat on. Instead of multiple choice answers, short answers or long form answers, drawing diagrams, things like that that really engage the student in the topics and the questions, and force them to explain themselves and demonstrate that they know the principles, the ideas. I think that automatically cuts down on the academic dishonesty, and of course has the great added benefit of being far more engaging and interesting for the students, and operates in those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy as well. So, I've always been a proponent of just asking questions and asking for student work to be in ways that are thoughtful and go beyond the simple short answer questions. I think that's a big key.
I want to jump in here too. Oh, I'm sorry,
please.
Flower. You can go ahead.
Please, you go ahead. No, please, you go ahead. I'll go next.
Okay, I was going to just stand up and applaud what Michael said because I totally agree. multiple choice tests. In one of my workshops, I actually asked faculty, pretend you can never give a multiple choice test ever again. And you should see, it's like, what? No multiple choice test? How would we assess? So just looking at different ways and variations of assessment, using more formative assessments rather than the summative assessments, I think that can help cut down on the questions around plagiarism, around cheating. And I always tell faculty, students are going to find a way to cheat. Online is not their only modality where they can cheat. So don't just think that is an open playground for cheating. But I agree wholeheartedly to what you said, Michael, and I want to applaud that.
Thank you.
Yes, this is such an important topic. I know we were both just jumping at the bit there to jump in on this, but again, certainly I would agree with both Michael and Wanda here. And I would also add that one of the simple strategies that we can use to encourage academic integrity is to rethink the way that we structure, and that's not actually coming out clear. Let me start again. Essentially, major exams encourage cheating. The psychology of cheating shows us that when students feel a lot of pressure in a high stakes environment, they will be more tempted to cut corners, so to speak, or look for ways to be successful in that high pressure situation. So one of the things that we can do is, instead of offering 2 or 3 major exams, to break up those tests and maybe offer 8 equally rigorous but lower stakes, because they're not worth as much of the grade, not worth as it's not such a significant percentage, and then we reduce that temptation for students to be less than honest. And then I also just wanted to share a quick resource that I have come across. I really love what they're doing at Oregon State University right now, and so I just popped into the chat box a website that helps us to think about the advantages that we might gain from offering open book exams, because I will be honest, my personal stance, if you're giving a test online, it's open book. So let's embrace the affordances again. Let's look at what the research says about how that can foster even better learning, more equitable, more inclusive learning. And so I would encourage people to check out this resource and others from Oregon State as well that are really relevant for what we're dealing with right now.
Thanks, Flower. And in the Q&A, Terry Thomas shared a good strategy as well. Sometimes the multiple choice test only lets you know how fast a student can look up an answer, but using them judiciously as knowledge checks with unlimited attempts and low or no points can be a way to use them as assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning. And I know there's that Venn diagram where often it's the middle ground that we seek. Another aspect of assessment that's popped up in the Q&A at least once is the concept of bias. And I know we've talked about equity and inclusion quite a bit. And so I'm wondering if any of you wants to address either the aspects of bias that can emerge in those multiple choice questions that maybe a publisher generates, and there's a cultural slant or a Eurocentric or dominant paradigm there, or any other aspects of bias that might emerge in an online environment, as well as the face-to-face / flexible environment. Do any of you want to respond to that question?
Well, I'll jump in. I think the technological challenges for students who come from less than wealthy families are, no matter how hard we work, no matter how many devices we send out, those challenges are still going to be there for those students. And I think you have to think about your grading policies and your class attendance policies in that light. If you're going to penalize students heavily for not being online at exactly the right time, that penalty is going to fall on a certain group of students more than likely. So I think that's one important thing to consider is how you structure class, what's required, and keeping in mind that many students find getting online very challenging.
And I want to add to that, when you mentioned the publisher tests, it's no secret that sometimes the semantics used and the vocabulary used in certain publishers or tests, that populations of students may not be familiar with the verbiage. So yes, it can pose some type of bias for students who have not been exposed to certain words or even the semantics that are used. So adding on to just the device gaps or digital gap there, looking at that as a bias as well.
That's a good point, Wanda. And I know, Flower, you have something you want to say too?
Sorry, thanks, Kevin. I was just going to add that this question makes me think of the importance of being culturally responsive, culturally relevant, culturally sustaining in the way that we're teaching in our online spaces, recognizing that our diverse students are bringing their cultural backgrounds to class with them. They don't just check them at the door. And so, again, some of the things that I mentioned before, including designing for relevance. How is what you're teaching your students going to relate to them in their everyday lives? And how are they going to see themselves in our class materials, activities, assignments, even certainly in the way that we're including and elevating scholars from historically underrepresented groups. These are some of the things that we can be thinking about as well to create that inclusive environment and to try to mitigate the bias that we know exists, to help everybody feel like they belong in our classes, they see themselves in our classes. These are some of the things that we can do too.
Kevin, I have one more thing to add too.
Please.
I have this thing that I call layers of anxiety for students. And we know that test anxiety is real. If they walk into our classroom to take a test, the anxiety is there. But we can add on what I call layers of anxiety. If the test is online, there's a layer. If the test is all multiple choice, there's a layer. If it's a timed test, there's another layer. So just thinking about peeling away those layers of anxiety for our student when it comes to assessment as well.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And going back to something Flower mentioned about cultural relevance, I know another aspect of being inclusive is thinking about different knowledge traditions. And a lot of us, especially with things like multiple choice exams, are focusing on an independent learner who is learning on their own amongst other people. And we sometimes forget that there are a wide number of cultures around the world that are interdependent. They learn in community. And so we've seen quite a few questions about helping students gain and improve their ability to network, participate in team building activities, connect with fellow students. And so what would you say around the concept of building learning community, especially given some of the comments we're seeing in the Q&A that building learning communities takes time, and some instructors may feel the pressure to continue moving forward with their course materials. Does anybody want to talk about strategies for building community and supporting students who use that as a way to learn?
I have lots of ideas, but Michael or Wanda, would you prefer to go first?
Well, I'll say that, sometimes less is more. You have to think about, you've always got this long list of things you want to cover in class, but you also have to think about what it is they're actually going to retain. I mean, there's not much point in covering a ton of material if an awful lot of it isn't retained. The whole point is that it is retained. So, I would, consider paring down the amount of stuff that you cover. What's the essential? What are the big important questions? I'd rather see students master those and then get a shallow coverage of a lot of things, some of which may not be so important.
Yes, I would. It's funny, Michael, when you said less is more, I was like, oh no, not less community building, but you went the same direction that I would go, which is
less
being very,
matter.
very intentional about what we do. And to Wanda's point earlier about kind of the flipped model, we can sort of offload some of the first contact with content into online spaces, be it through mini video lectures or readings. Historically, that's what we've always done. And then reserve and protect class meeting time for the opportunity to make connections with people. We know that building trust between students really helps their learning. And as Kevin said, we all are, but especially as people from some particular cultures, more interdependent cultures might really benefit from the opportunities to be social and collaborate with other people in our learning. So I like to encourage us to take a little bit of class time deliberately to build relationships This might be something that we didn't used to do or think about when we taught in person, but online it's really helpful to make that extra effort. So for example, opening class with a quick warm up or icebreaker question, or getting to know you kinds of things, structuring that into group work if you have breakout groups, inviting students to take just a minute or two to answer a quick getting to know you question. That it really can help to foreground that relationship building in order to help students engage with each other, and I would argue with the concepts and what they're learning as well.
And I'll just add in one last thing. When I think about a fully online class, and I told you about the asynchronous part, we often lose that ability to have a community. So as much as you can, letting students see you on video, talking to them, responding, using some of the LMS tools that will allow you to talk to them, either audio or video comments back on assignments, that builds more trust. And it's not like the wizard behind the curtain grading my paper or grading my assignment feel that students may have. So in terms of fully online classes and asynchronous fields, that's something I think about often.
Yeah, I agree. I think that taking a fully asynchronous class or even teaching one can be kind of a lonely experience. You know, you don't really feel like you're connected to anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, having instructors build in active learning type modalities into their asynchronous courses will really change the course and make it much more personal, and just tap into, you know, students helping each other learn, which is so powerful. Active learning has been shown to help close equity gaps and raise overall student performance in one, you know, well-controlled study after another. So that's one of the things we liked about the AQ Excellence in Online Teaching Practices course, is it does spend a lot of time on active learning in the online course, so that's something we're really hoping our faculty will take away from it.
Well, and I'm going to add my own question because I'm just that kind of guy. The idea that we have these mixed modalities where we might have some students in the classroom, some online, some might even be asynchronous because they have jobs or they're taking care of their children, or their children are learning at the same time. How do we foster that sense of community among the different groups of students in our classes? Have any of you found some good strategies for that to help those students who may not be able to join in real time, or maybe just having a harder time connecting with their classmates?
Well, Kevin, I'll start with a quick tip that I learned from you when we met to discuss, you know, prepare for this event. You were talking about changing our language to be more intentionally inclusive. So instead of saying, if you're not here with us right now, we might change that phrase to be, if you are joining us online, or if you are learning on your own time, and just really being a little bit more welcoming in the language that we use. And then another strategy that I have been encouraging folks to consider is to really prioritize online students. And right now I'm thinking specifically of students who are joining remote synchronous online. People are in the room, but what about the people who are zooming in, so to speak? And just learning from my own kids' experience, I have 3 middle and high school daughters, and they talk a lot about how the people in Zoom just get excluded. It's like they don't even exist. That's just their experience in terms of us all getting kind of used to this modality. But I think a really tangible way to address that is to turn first to our online students who might be joining remote synchronous and say, hey, let's you know, what do some of you think? Let's invite, let's be very intentional in the way that we acknowledge and make that effort to include. And just as you said also, Kevin, about relying on support in like, for example, another student, I'm seeing some faculties saying to the students in the room, hey, help me keep an eye. If somebody has something in the chat, or if they raise a hand in Zoom, call that out and help me just kind of, you know, collectively sort of crowdsourcing that inclusion of the folks who are remote synchronous. But I'd love to hear if others have ideas too.
Well, you just reminded me that there's a concept that I share with people called a run of show document. And when we teach in the classroom, we don't normally need an outline of what we're going to cover in our class. But when we have multiple modalities, it's helpful to have little snippets of script to remind you that you should say, hey, if you're online right now in Zoom, then I'm going to get to you in a second and put you in breakout rooms. Here's what you should be doing right now. But giving instructions to each set of students and making sure you put it in your script is a way to go. Sorry, Michael, I think I may have
No, that was a great suggestion. I suspect after you do that a half a dozen times, everything becomes much more natural to you. I was going to add that adding, structure to your online course. In other words, maybe breaking students into smaller groups that are going to work together for all or part of the semester, and then purposely, giving them assignments that pulls everybody in. So instead of, for example, having one big discussion board that's open to the 35 students in your class, it's very easy for students to sort of disappear into that crowd of 35 students. But if you have a smaller discussion board with, say, 6 or 8 students, and you set some standards for how often they're supposed to respond, and so on, then you can really try to engage everybody in the class. So that addition of structure and that sort of deep planning of how exactly you're going to engage students, I think would probably help.
Nice. Well, as we approach the end of our time together, I'd like to give you each another opportunity to provide us with one, what I call tweet-sized takeaways about our topic today, getting better prepared for online and hybrid learning. Just one idea in, let's say, 15 to 20 seconds. And we'll start with Wanda.
Wow, a tweet size. Okay. I think I would say this, be flexible, still have fun, never forget your love for teaching, even though the modality changed, the passion should still be there and the students can sense it. So just keep it simple and be flexible.
Nice. Michael.
I think, my tweet-sized comment would be that good pedagogy is good pedagogy, whether it's in person, online, or in hybrid mode, or high flex, whatever. The same principles apply. Engage students, make it personal, add your personal character to the class, and make students think, and it'll all go pretty well either way.
And Flower.
Yes, so I would just encourage us to continue this investment of time and effort and energy into becoming better online and hybrid teachers. We know this isn't going away. These options are going to expand, and it increases access. It is an equitable and inclusive thing to do, but we have to kind of keep ourselves motivated to come to events like this, to keep on learning, to keep encouraging each other. So I would just really encourage us to keep on keeping on, and continue our own professional learning for the sake of our students and their equitable success.
Flower, keep on keeping on. It just reminded me that I heard today that we are now referring to the previous millennium as the late 1900s. Made me feel old when I heard somebody talk about the late 1900s. To round out today's discussion, I'd really like to welcome Dr. Jessica Roland Williams from Every Learner Everywhere to give us a few closing remarks. Oh, you're on mute, Jessica.
Of course, right? Hi, everyone. What a fantastic session. I'm the director of Every Learner Everywhere, and Every Learner Everywhere is an organization that helps institutions to implement digital tools that specifically serve Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and poverty-affected and first-generation students. And all too often, we've seen how technology adopted in the name of progress has exacerbated problems and really deepened inequities in society. And so we also know this is held true within higher education, where historically racially marginalized and poverty-affected students have really been unjustly and underserved by higher education for centuries. And we really run the risk of continuing to underserve this population of students, specifically as institutions rely more heavily on technology-based teaching tools in response to COVID-19. And so right now we're at a really key moment in higher ed. And it's so incredible that we had such a timely panel because faculty, as you all know, are working hard to make more inclusive choices and to leverage technology and online teaching and learning practices to broaden accessibility and encourage innovative pedagogy. And it was such a treat to hear all of the practical tips and guidance today from our all-star educators. And some of the things our panelists highlighted are how we've had this incredible opportunity to make and sustain connections with and between students and maintain that community, and also design for relevance and choice. And one of our panelists says, just an easy way to start is to find that one tool that works best for you and hang on to that. It was also highlighted how we have to, make space for continuous professional development for faculty and learning, and also reward faculty who are innovating and doing this incredible work. But of course, we also know that this work is incredibly difficult and messy and exhausting, and we are all on this learning journey together. And so I just want to double click and highlight, some of the key questions that we have to repeatedly ask ourselves during this process, including how do we give ourselves grace? And also, how do we pass that grace down to our students? And how do we make this experience a human experience and not just a learning experience? And so lastly, I just want to take the time and say thank you to all the faculty and educators and innovators that are on this call today for your commitment to serving students in a way that is equitable and inclusive through online teaching. My network, Every Learner Everywhere, is an organization that's here to support you. AQ, of course, is here to support you. These incredible panelists are here to support you. And so many organizations are rooting for you and have your back in this fight, and you are not alone. And so thank you. And with that, I will send it back to you, Kevin.
Thank you so much. And you raised so many good points. I want to call everyone's attention to the resources, not only from Every Learner Everywhere, but also from AQ, the toolkit for this series of webinars, as well as the toolkits that have been online for a little while. We really want to thank all of you for joining us today, and you'll see a survey link in the chat for you to provide feedback on today's session. We rely on your input to continue to offer the most relevant and engaging content. So please complete the survey so that we can continue providing valuable content for you all. I will certainly hope to see you all at our next one of these, and please have a great day. And as Jessica mentioned, thank you for all that you do as instructors and staff on the campuses around the world.